We're going to start our probability unit by looking at the likelihood of events happening. At the top of page 15, you should see a place that says probability. I want you to write down the definition of probability that you see on your screen. Probability is the likelihood of an event occurring. We will represent probability on a scale from 0 to 1, which can be written as a fraction, a decimal, or a percent. If you look below that, you can see a number line. That number line is broken up into impossible, unlikely, as likely as not, likely, and certain. If something is impossible, that means it can never happen. That would be like me saying rolling a die and landing on a 15. That is not possible if I roll one normal die. So that would be what we call an impossible likelihood or an impossible event. That's represented using a 0. So we can represent probability in a fraction, which I would use as 0. And then if you notice, my number line is broken up into fourths. If something is certain, then it is definitely going to happen. So that has a probability of 1. There is no probability larger than 1. That is the only thing that I can have, anything from 0 to 1. So anything in between it, you'll notice is broken up by fourths. 1/4, 1/2, which is 2/4, and 3/4. If something is unlikely, that means that it is probably not going to happen, but as long as it's not 0, there is still a chance of that happening. That's something like winning the lottery. It is very, very, very difficult to win the lottery, almost impossible, but it does happen. So that makes it unlikely, but it could still happen. If something is as likely as not, we call it that, or sometimes you'll see it referred to as equally likely. So these are the same thing. This means that it could happen or it could not happen. There is basically what we call a 50-50 chance of it happening. That might be flipping a coin and landing on heads. Well, if I flip a coin, there's only two options, so I'm either going to land on heads or tails. So it's as likely to land on heads as it is to not land on heads. If something is likely, that means that it probably will happen. So it's greater than a 50% or half chance, but it's not certain because it will not definitely happen. So, because of that, that's where it would land on our number line. If it's certain, like we said, that's going to be 1/2. It can also be represented as a decimal. So if I take 0 and represent it as a decimal, it's still 0. But 1/4 will change to 0.25, 1/2 will change to 0.5, and likely will change to 0.75, and certain will change to 1. Well, all decimals and fractions can also be written as percents. So these can also be written as 0%, 25%, 50%, 75%, and 100%. The important thing to know about this is that if something is impossible, it must have a probability of 0. If something is as likely as not, it must have a probability of 1/2 or 50%. If something is certain, it must have a probability of 1 or 100%. So these must have the probabilities that are on this number line. The difference is that if something is unlikely, it's going to be any number that is between 0 and 50%. So if I said that I had a 2% chance of something happening, that is not impossible, even though it's very close to it, because it could still happen. If something had a 2% chance of happening, it would be called unlikely. That's just like saying something has a 99.9% chance of happening. It's still right here next to 100%, but it is not there unless it is exactly 100%. So that would be likely. So you need to know that anything between 0 and 50% is unlikely, and anything between 50% and 100% is likely. Now let's look at the probability of each of these events. The first one says you roll a six-sided number cube and it lands on a number 1 or greater. You're going to see this a lot. Number cube. A number cube is just a die. So if you roll a six-sided number cube or a die, I want to know the probability of it landing on a number 1 or greater. Well, think about a number cube. What are the numbers on a number cube? The numbers on a number cube are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that means every number on the number cube is either 1 or higher than 1. So the probability of landing on a 1 or something higher is that there are 6 numbers on the number cube that are 1 or higher out of 6 numbers on the die. Well, if I do 6 over 6, that gives me 1. If I have a probability of 1, that means that this is certain. Number 2 says a bag contains 5 red and 5 blue marbles. You reach into the bag and pull out a purple marble. If I have 5 red and 5 blue marbles and I'm looking for a purple marble, well, in this bag, there are no purple marbles. So the probability of purple is 0 out of, well, there are 10 marbles because 5 of them are red and 5 of them are blue. So I know that there are 10. So this is 0 out of 10, which is just 0. If I have 0, then that means that this probability is impossible. Number 3 says a spinner is divided into 6 equal sections labeled 1 through 6. You spin it and it lands on an even number. Well, if our sections are 1 through 6, then that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Well, I'm looking for an even number. I notice that I have 2, 4, and 6. So there are 3 even numbers out of, well, there were 6 total numbers on the spinner. So 3 out of 6 will simplify to 1/2. If I'm at 1/2, then that means the probability of this occurring is as likely as not, or equally likely, because that is a 50% chance. Now let's look at page 16. Page 16 says the probability of an event. So when we see P and then we see something in parentheses, this always means probability of event. So you should write that. To find the probability of event, we're going to do what we were just doing. That means we're going to take the number of times that the event occurs and put it over the total number of possible outcomes. So you should write this on the line in your notes. Now let's look at some examples. Example 1 says, what is the probability of landing on an even number on the spinner below? Well, when I see this spinner, I see that it has 8 sections, and I notice that there are 1, 2, 3, 4 sections that are even. So 4 even sections, or actually I'm going to write this as the probability of an even number is equal to, I have 4 sections that are even out of 8 total sections. Well, if I do 4 over 8 and I simplify that, then I have 1/2. 1/2 is the same as 50% or 0.5. Well, if I look at my number line, then if I have this, then the likelihood of it occurring is as likely as not. Number 2 says, what is the probability of picking a heart from a standard deck of cards, which has 13 cards in each of the 4 suits: diamonds, clubs, hearts, and spades? I know that a standard deck of cards has 52 cards. So if I'm going to find the probability of a heart, then I'm looking for how many cards have hearts on them. Well, I know there are 13 of each of these, so there are 13 diamonds, 13 clubs, 13 hearts, and 13 spades. So there are 13 hearts out of 52 total hearts. Well, if I simplify 13 over 52, which you can put into your calculator and have your calculator simplify for you, I am going to get 1/4. Well, 1/4 is the same as 0.25 or 25%. So the likelihood of this happening is unlikely because this number is between 0 and 50%. Now it says, what is the probability of rolling a number greater than 4 on a standard number cube? So I'm going to write this as probability of greater than 4. Well, if I think of a number cube, if I say greater than 4, I know that that does not actually include 4. Otherwise, it would have said 4 or greater than or equal to 4. So the numbers on my number cube that are greater than 4 are 5 and 6. So that is 2 numbers on my number cube that are greater than 4. And that is out of 6 total numbers on my number cube. Well, if I simplify that, it's 1/3. And if I change 1/3 into a decimal, I know that I'm going to get 0.3, and that 3 repeats, so I would put a bar over it. Well, to change that into a percent, I would move the decimal 2 places. And a lot of times when I move the decimal 2 places, I would put a 0 in this place. But I wouldn't for this number because for this number, I know that the next number is going to be 3 because this repeats. So as a percent, this would actually be 33.3 repeating percent. Now, when you look at your number line, it looks like you don't have a place for that, but you do because 33.3 repeating is in between 0 and 50. So anything in between 0 and 50% is unlikely. Now let's look at page 17. On page 17, we're going to talk about the complement of an event. The complement of an event is the probability of that event not happening. It's important to know that the probability of an event plus the probability of its complement is always going to give us 1. So an example of this would be if you were asked to find the probability of rolling a 5 on a number cube. The complement of rolling a 5 is not rolling a 5. So that would be everything that is not a 5, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, or 6. So the examples say, what is the probability of not rolling a 2 on a standard number cube? Well, if I think of my number cube, it has 6 numbers, and the ones that are not 2 are 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Well, that is 5. So the probability of not rolling a 2 is 5 on the number line that are on this number cube that are not 2 out of 6 total on the number cube. Well, if I solve that, I'm going to get 0.83 with my 3 repeating as a decimal, which is 83.3 repeating percent. Because this is between 50% and 100%, I know that the probability of this happening is likely. Number 2 says there are 13 diamonds in a standard deck of 52 cards. If you pick one at random, what is the probability of not picking a diamond? So to figure out how many are not diamonds, you know that you have 52, but we don't want to look at the 13 that are diamonds. So we could do 52 minus 13, which would give us 39. So the probability of not choosing a diamond is that there are 39 cards that are not diamonds out of 52 total cards. Well, if I divide both of these by 13, this would simplify to 3/4. And 3/4 is the same as 0.75, which is 75%. Anything between 50 and 100% has a probability or a likelihood of being likely to happen. Number 3 says a spinner has 5 equal sections labeled A, B, C, D, and E. What is the probability of not landing on D? So this numbers or letters that I could land on are A, B, C, and E. So the probability of not landing on D are that there are 4 letters that are not D out of 5 total letters. Well, that's a simplified fraction, so if I turned it into a decimal, I would get 0.8. And if I turned that decimal into a fraction, a decimal, a percent, I would change that into 80%. Well, again, anything between 50 and 100 is likely to happen. So this is likely.